Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another video this weekend, and a crazy weekend of a bunch of releases. Of course, we had the Acolyte a few days ago. We had Bad Boys Ride or Die, which I also have a video out, along with Hitman, which was releasing on Netflix this week as well. I have reviews out for all three of those. This is going to be the last video of the weekend. It is for The Watchers, which is directed by Ishana Shyamalan, starring Dakota Fanning, Georgina Campbell, Olwen, Fouéré, and Oliver Finnegan. And like I said, this movie is directed by Ishana Shyamalan, who is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan, and this very much does feel like a Shyamalan movie in terms of a lot of different qualities of this film. Maybe it's the clunky dialogue, maybe it's the style and the very well directed horror sequences, or maybe it's just the fact that this movie is an extremely interesting but mixed bag of a movie. I'm very excited to talk about spoilers for this movie, so I have not seen The Watchers in theaters, and that trailer did sell you on it and the intrigue, and if you're a fan of the Shyamalans, I would recommend this movie, although I don't think this movie is really all that great. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it follows Dakota Fanning's character, Mina, who is, driving through the woods because she needs to take this parrot from one place to another. She's clearly, hiding a lot of things deep inside of her. She even tells the parrot that, you wouldn't like the real me. I am kind of a front, going out to bars, dressing in wigs to try to be somebody else because she's not comfortable in her own skin for whatever reason. And now she's tasked to take this bird somewhere. So she hops in the car. She's driving this bird over, and this bird can really only say one thing, which is try not to die, which I thought was a funny joke throughout the entirety of this movie. But the teaser trailer basically just showed the first 15 minutes of this movie, which is to say that her car breaks down and she ends up in this concrete structure with these three other people, and this one-way mirror is the only way that people can see inside of this place, which is a very intriguing concept because they say that there are creatures out there, or something is out there that is watching them, that is kind of studying them for whatever reason. They don't really know why. They just know that they're being watched, and they cannot go at nighttime, and they cannot go in these burrows, these holes in the ground that these creatures stay in during the daytime. It's very much kind of a mixture between maybe The Village and maybe, I guess, Signs, if I were to compare it to any of M. Night's films that he's had. I honestly think it's an intriguing premise. I believe this movie is based on a book, which, of course, if you're taking, some inspiration from a novel, you're going to have the worries of it being a book adaptation. Are you going to be able to fill all the information that this story needs from this book that is much more in depth into a runtime that is much shorter than that of a book? And so I think that is the main issue that I have with this movie, which is just the translation from book to screen. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, of exposition in this movie, pretty much from the very first scene to the very last scene of this entire movie. It is nothing but explaining the different, plot developments that this movie is. It explains to you who the characters are. You literally have characters saying things out loud that people normally wouldn't say out loud, or you have the person who has been in this situation the longest, who is Madeline, who is the old woman who I believe was also in Tarot. So, yeah, she was also in that horror movie, which I did watch. Don't want to talk about it. It wasn't great. But, she is an intriguing character because she clearly knows the most of everybody stuck in this situation. She kind of establishes the rules, and she's able to kind of try to keep everybody in line because you have this one guy who is kind of the wild card who wants to kind of break the rules to try to run away. You also have this girl in here that is kind of the one who is more in line with Madeline, who is very much not wanting to break the rules. And then you have Dakota Fanning's character, who is new to this entire situation, so she's going to be explained everything by Madeline. And of course, movies need to have exposition in it, but there are so many moments in this film that was just I get it. I don't think you really need to explain anything else to me, but then they keep on explaining it, and they explain it some more. And it's not just that they're explaining, the situation at hand and the plot. They're explaining the themes of this movie to you, especially when it comes to one of the final scenes of this movie. They're basically just, laying everything out for you. And so let's just slowly go through this movie until we get to the final ending scenes and the twists and turns that this movie takes, because, of course, Ishana Shyamalan is a Shyamalan. It's going to have a Shyamalan twist, and, it's not an original story. It is based on a book, so I guess there's that. But it is a good story for a Shyamalan to make because it is kind of formatted in a way that's kind of works for the style of M. Night Shyamalan. But once Mina is settled into this situation and she has everything explained to her by Madeline throughout the entire first act of this movie, what is she going to do during the daytime where she can actually go out and explore this area? The first day she tries to run away, she tries to escape the situation because she doesn't want to be trapped here like Kira has been for 6 or so months, I think is what she said, or however in the world long Madeline has been in this place. She wants to get out, so she tries to leave, and she reaches the point of no return, which is where these shrines themes are that were apparently built by the professor. The professor was essentially the first character who was trapped here, which I think they believe that the professor was the first one to be trapped in this situation. And so once you reach the point of no return, it takes about half a day to walk back to the shelter. And so if you go past this point, you're not going to be able to make it back in time before the sun sets, and you're basically screwed. And so she decides to go back to the shelter with all these other characters, and now you're stuck here and you're going to try to live your life. You're going to watch a reality television show on TV, which is very ironic considering you're stuck in this confined little area with people supposedly watching every single move that you make. It is very much a metaphor for, I guess, human behaviors, I guess, and a deconstruction of what you do when you're put under a microscope, which I think is one of the ideas in this movie that is a bit more subtle than all the other themes throughout this entire movie. But you do quickly learn that Mina is not the type of character that is going to sit here and just let all this stuff happen like Kira's character is, and so she's going to try to explore one of the burrows. This is the first rule that she decides to break, and she goes with the help of Daniel. And when she gets down there, she finds a bike that they can possibly use to get past the point of no return. And you're looking around this cave, and there's all these items that they have essentially kind of snagged throughout all the time that these creatures have been down here, which they are creatures. It's not like a Village type of twist where the creatures are not real. It is real creatures, and they're actually really cool. I'll get into the mythology of these things in a minute here, but it's a very intriguing and very tense sequence where she's down in this pit and she's trying to get this bike up so they can possibly escape, and it's a very tense sequence. This is one of the sequences in this movie that proves that I think Ishana Shyamalan has a lot of talent to her. She has an ability to make a well-crafted movie. I think the cinematography in particular in this movie is very, very well done, and I think the tension she gets in these contained sequences do work. Madeline, of course, freaks out that they went into the burrows because they broke one of the rules, and she is absolutely terrified of the implications of what it's going to mean for this nighttime, because essentially if you go out during the daytime and you get this bike, you don't have time to take the bike out right then and there. You spent all your time going into the burrows, and so they have to wait out the night. But these creatures are going to know that you went into the burrows, you broke one of the rules. What are these creatures going to do because you did that? Well, they're going to freak out that night, and they're going to smash a piece of the mirror in. That's going to be, enough to terrify these characters to not to make the choice to take this bike past the point of no return. And Madeline's going to take this bike and throw it back in the pit to try to appease, I guess, these creatures, to let them know that these people are not going to try to escape, which this Madeline character is doing everything that she can to try to keep everything contained in this one building and to not let things go out of hand, which I'll get into her motivations a little bit later on, which I don't think entirely makes sense. But at the moment, as you're watching this film, it does make sense because she's been there the longest. She is the most wise. It kind of reminded me of The Maze Runner with, Sergeant Eyebrows, who is the one who doesn't want our main characters to explore this maze. He is very much the character that's trying to keep everybody in, try to keep the peace of this entire situation while also kind of being a dick while doing it. That's essentially the Madeline character in this film. But this all leads to probably my favorite sequence in this entire movie, which is the sequence where, Daniel has essentially had enough. He does not want to follow Madeline's rules anymore. He wants to see exactly what happens if you break those rules. So he decides to tie Madeline up, and he goes in with Kira into the shelter, and they lock themselves in there without Mina and Madeline, because Mina decided to go save Madeline to try to untie her to bring her back to the shelter, and now they're locked out of this thing. Again, very Maze Runner-esque. The parallels are very much here, but again, this is probably my favorite sequence of the entire movie, even though it did feel a little bit short because they are stuck in the nighttime and they finally see these creatures, which are very kind of lanky. They're very tall and skinny, and they have these long claws, and they have almost this weird like hair-like thing on top of their head, and they move very stagnantly. They crawl on the ground, and they're very vicious and animalistic, and I really love the design and the visual effects that they do with these creatures, which I do think was unsettling to a certain point. I thought they were a pretty cool design, and the sounds that you've heard them make throughout the entire first half of this movie was unsettling enough to now see the form of what these things are, to match those sounds to the actual creature themselves, and to have the confirmation that they are actually creatures in this movie was nice to see. And so all these creatures realize that there's only two of them in this shelter, so they go out scurrying into the forest to try to look for these characters, because of course they don't want these people to escape. And then you have Madeline and Mina just run back up to the door and try to convince Daniel and Kira to let them back inside, which they do let them back inside, which I think that felt a little bit anticlimactic. I was hoping they'd kind of try to survive the night for an entire entire sequence, but no, they run back into the place pretty quickly. But the creatures soon, converge back onto the shelter, and they start attacking this thing. They start knocking down the walls and knocking down the glass, and the characters really have no idea what to do before, there's a rug on the ground that is moved out of the way, and you realize there is a bunker underneath the bunker, underground safe essentially, that they can go into to protect themselves. And lo and behold, you get more exposition on the professor and on why he was in this place, and you get an explanation as to who these creatures are, which, let's get into the mythology of these things, which they are essentially fairies. They are fays. They are these mystical creatures that lived in the past in harmony with humanity. They had these wings. They were these angelic creatures that, lived side by side with humanity until a certain point where there's a war between them. And, because of these creatures kind of going against their natural instincts, they kind of, over evolution, lost their wings and became these feral creatures that were then locked into these, underground facilities that's, humanity made to kind of suppress them. That is why they are in this area. They cannot escape this forest because they're essentially banished. It also shows that the professor had one of these creatures inside of this bunker at one point that eventually led to his death. And so you get little bits and pieces of exposition and explanations as to why this bunker is here in the first place. The professor built it to study these creatures, which I have heard some people say the plot holes of who built this facility, because it feels and looks very modern because it has that two-way mirror. And so how did the construction people get into this forest that you cannot possibly escape because of these creatures to build this entire facility? What came first? It's like a chicken and the egg type of situation. Or did this, forest always exist, but they were stuck underground, and when the professor came here, he built this facility and he let these creatures loose? I think that would probably be the best explanation as to why this entire place exists in the first place. I do think it's a plot hole, but nonetheless, it is, a plot element of this movie, and this professor was here for some reason to study these creatures because of reasons that we'll get into in the ending. But these fairy creatures aren't just these feral monsters. They have the ability to mimic the form of different humans, and so that's why they are watchers. That's why they watch them in the nighttime, because they're trying to study them. They're trying to figure out exactly how they move, how they talk, and try to mimic their forms throughout this entire last half of the movie, because they want to disguise themselves as human to be able to escape, or to be able to convince these people that maybe a loved one that they lost in this forest several days ago is still alive, and maybe you can lure them into opening the door or doing any sort of these things that these things are going to try to manipulate these characters for. And so once they get into that bunker and they decide to try to escape from this place, because they know there's a boat out here in the woods that the professor used to get to this place in the first place, they think they could possibly escape. And you get the entire sequence where they're going out into the woods during the daytime, and the nighttime starts to set as soon as they find the boat. And the character of, I think maybe Johnny or something like that, the husband of Kira's character, runs out into the woods and convinces Daniel to try to go back and save him. But lo and behold, it is a mimic, and he kills Daniel. Honestly, I didn't really care for Daniel's character too much, and I think that is easily one of my biggest issues with this movie, is I didn't connect really with any of the characters in this film. They're all extremely paper thin, and I think that the characters in this could have been much better suited if there was maybe a montage after the first act of the movie where you spend maybe just more than 2 days in these woods with Mina, getting to know these people. I think that could have gone a very long way. And I'm sure the characters in the books are much more interesting, but because you're constrained in a 90-minute runtime that this movie has, you don't really have a lot of time to explore the themes of these characters and to explore, I guess, the nature of humanity and the behaviors that they exhibit inside of this contained situation, which I think is what the movie is trying to be a theme for. Maybe the book has, I guess, some thematic elements with each of these characters. It is very much not present in this movie, so when Daniel dies, I really couldn't care less. Easily was one of the most disappointing aspects of this movie, was the fact that nobody really I cared about. But they escape. Movie is over, right? Well, no, you still have about 20 minutes here. And I've heard a couple reviews saying that, once you get to the point where you think the movie's over, just walk out now. The rest of the movie is not worth staying for. And I would honestly disagree, because I think the last 20 minutes of this movie and the actual Shyamalan twist, if you will, was pretty interesting. It actually did work for me. So what is the twist at the end of this movie? Well, essentially, Madeline has been one of the creatures the entire time. And in the entire sequence where they're in the bunker and you kind of learn about the mythology of these fey creatures, you figure out that at one point there were some procreation between humans and these creatures to create these half-bloods, and this Madeline character is essentially a half-blood. She doesn't realize she's a half-blood. She thinks that she is just a day walker. She doesn't get affected by the sunlight unlike all these other ones, and so she feels like an outcast outcast in her own community of all these creatures. And, she takes the form of Madeline because Madeline was the wife of the professor character. You learn after they all escape, and Mina does some research on everything that happened with the professor and sees, the floor plans for this facility, and sees that he was married to a woman that looked exactly like Madeline. And Madeline actually died from cancer several years before the events of this movie, and even before the events of, this professor going out into the woods in the first place. And he wanted to get to these mimics in order to try to get one of these creatures to become his wife. He basically just wanted his wife back. And it's a tragic backstory, maybe. I don't know if it's really all that tragic, because yet again, it's just told to us through exposition. We don't really get to see the interpersonal relationships and the love that he had for his wife. So it doesn't really fully connect here, but that is one of the reveals at the end of this film. But honestly, I really did enjoy these reveals. I did enjoy the investigation of Mina figuring out all these things. It's very much more of a show don't tell. Finally, in this movie, there's a little bit more subtlety. I guess maybe not subtlety is the word, but it's not as overtly, telling you exactly what happened in this case, because, Mina does all the, investigating before she goes over to a meeting that they're supposed to have with Kira and Madeline, because, they escaped. They wanted to get, their story straight. They wanted to meet up with each other occasionally to try to, figure out exactly what happened to them in these woods. And when Mina's explaining everything to Kira, she realizes that somebody's driving up, and who is in that car other than Kira. And now you have this character and is now impersonating Kira instead of Madeline. It's another really great reveal as well. I think the audience that I watched this with was like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool moment. I wish the movie did more stuff like that, because you have this creature, I guess you can say, that can mimic anybody, and so it's kind of like the Thing, where you don't really know who the Thing is at any given moment. I think they could have played a lot more with that tension throughout the movie. I think it could have been more interesting to see some scenes where maybe Mina is out in the woods and she has a conversation with who she thinks is Daniel, but it's later revealed that it wasn't Daniel, that it was still Madeline, perfecting her ability to blend in with humanity. Honestly, I think moments like that could have made this movie a little bit more tense throughout. But nonetheless, I think this final act, this final sequence is enough to keep the thrills up for this ending of the movie, that it feels a little bit more impactful, because the actual escape from the forest was a bit underwhelming for me. So to see it have one little push with them confronting this Madeline character, I thought was pretty cool. And I actually really dug the ending of, not killing this creature, but to try to get an understanding for this character. Because throughout this entire film, of course, I set up Mina as being a character who is kind of hiding her true self. You figure out that her mom died recently, and that she feels responsible for her mom's death because she was messing around in the car as a young girl, and it caused her mom to be distracted while driving, and it got her mother killed. And it's also revealed that Mina also had a twin sister who was the one who was trying to get in contact with her at the beginning of the film. And Mina, being so disassociated with her own life, feeling like an outsider with her own family, has an ability to relate to this character of Madeline, who is a creature that is a daywalker, that feels like an outcast with all these other creatures that are in these woods, that also wants to escape their life. And so they're able to have a connection and a conversation at the end of this movie to let Madeline spare these characters instead of killing these characters and clearing her path essentially to cover all her tracks. The caveat there being that you're told all these things. I'm not really dissecting this movie and its themes. The movie just basically tells you straight up with Mina's character telling exactly what I said to Madeline's character to get Madeline to not kill her. There's really no subtlety whatsoever in this ending at all, which again kind of topples onto the, I guess, main complaint that I have with this movie being way too exposition heavy, way too much of tell, don't show. I really wish this movie trusted the audience just a little bit more to understand these themes and to kind of dissect and figure out these things on your own. But maybe that's either some studio complaints, or maybe that's growing pains for Ishana Night Shyamalan as a first-time director, or maybe it's the book itself not being very subtle. So maybe the actual issues with this story is more in line with the core story that it's based off of in and of itself, which if that is the case, then maybe it's something that you couldn't fix. But either way, the movie does end with Mina kind of reconciling with her sister, which you get one last scene where she's essentially saying in this voiceover that, she still feels like this character, this Madeline character, still watches over her every once in a while. It's kind of a creepy, but also kind of poetic way to end off this story with, Madeline being free out in the world, having sprouted her wings also, which, you know, after the whole monologue that Mina has, this character sprouts her wings and is now the, I guess, the fake creature that she is meant to be, and she's more free as a character as well. There's some character growth with that as well that I thought was pretty good, but the idea that she's still there kind of observing, kind of watching over her is kind of poetic, and it's kind of interesting to see the characters and the story to go in a direction that I was not expecting by the end of it. But that is The Watchers, and that is Ishana Night Shyamalan's feature directorial debut, very much showcasing the higher highs of M. Night Shyamalan's career and the lower lows of M. Night Shyamalan's career to make a very middle of the road movie, which again was fairly disappointing to me because I was excited to see what she had in store with this movie. And I think the main issues that I had was story and script wise. Again, the dialogue felt much more like the complaints that I've heard about the Acolyte of the dialogue feeling stilted and kind of, you know, not very inspired. That is how I feel about this movie, less so than I do feel about the Acolyte. So I don't know, maybe go check out my Acolyte review. It's not doing well at all. Please watch my Acolyte review. It's a great show, or a good show. I want to say great. But either way, that is my review for The Watchers. Thanks everybody for watching this video, and definitely comment down below if you did see this movie this weekend, all your thoughts on this film. Were you disappointed in it like I was, or did you enjoy the twists and turns that this movie brought you down? I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts in the comment section down below. But that is going to be it for me. Like I said, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. Like I said, Hitman, Acolyte, and Bad Boys Ride or Die videos are all out here on the channel, and I hope to see you all in my next one.